6 billion people flowed along the massive highways, moving like a slow, steady current through iron channels. Their combined breath rose into the air like a cloud of incense, a daily offering to their distant emperor. The familiar scent of fuel and holy oils filled the air. It was the smell of duty, a weight Vaynar had carried without complaint for 47 years. Beyond the endless industrial landscape of the hive, the ocean stretched out, its surface as dark and empty as the space between stars. For 300 years those waters had been quiet, disturbed only by the passage of mining submarines and the occasional pilgrim ship.
The deep-sea sensors had reported nothing unusual, just the slow, grinding shift of tectonic plates in the trenches far below, where ancient mining machines sometimes pulled forgotten relics from the planet's crust. Vaynar turned from the window, the scars on his face illuminated by the amber and red glow of the holographic screens that filled the command center. The morning's updates were routine. Production targets had been met. A handful of forbidden writings had been found and destroyed. A small rebellion in one of the sectors had been put down, with losses deemed acceptable. It was the normal state of affairs for an imperial world, all running under the emperor's watchful gaze, maintained by the labor of his followers.
The first shake came at the 9th hour. Vaynar felt it through his boots before any alarm sounded. The great spire swayed, just a little, like a tree touched by a wind that hadn't been there a moment before. The servitors, the hive's half-machine laborers, paused in their work, their mechanical heads tilting as if listening to something new in the air.
30 seconds later, the second tremor hit, stronger this time. It sent ripples through cups of recaf left forgotten on console tops. "Sir," came the voice of tech priest Korin over the Voxcaster, stripped of all emotion yet sharp with urgency. "We are detecting a major seismic event in the deep ocean, magnitude 7.3. It's about 40 kilometers out from the main seawall." The dawn sky above Hive Caritas was a deep, bloody red against the hive's dark metallic towers. Commissar Vaynar stood at the very top of the command spire, his worn hands holding tight to the rusted railing. Below, the morning shift was beginning its long journey down into the factory depths. Through the thick glass, Vaynar watched the ocean begin to change. The water, once a flat, dark mirror, was now churning with white foam, as if something immense was stirring far beneath the surface. On the horizon, the ancient lighthouse at Beacon Point, a sentinel that had stood for 3,000 years, began to flash a frantic warning in the coded language of the Imperium. "Order all ships back to harbor immediately," Vaynar commanded, his voice steady with the authority of his office. "I want all defense forces on high alert. Scan that water. I want a new sweep every 30 seconds.
Then the third tremor tore through the morning. It didn't shake the hive so much as try to wrestle it to the ground. Windows throughout the spire cracked into intricate spiderwebs, and the entire structure groaned like a living thing.
Alarms shrieked, their electronic wails a desperate hymn to the machine god, while emergency lights washed the room in a deep red glow. From outside, Vaynar could hear it, the low, rising rumble of a million voices, a city suddenly remembering its own fragility. "Commissar," Korin's voice was back on the Vox, but the mechanical calm was gone, replaced by raw alarm. "The seismic readings, they're beyond our scale. And sir, there's more. The water is displacing, shifting in a way that suggests an object of incredible mass is rising from the seabed. My calculations suggest it is larger than any battleship."
Commissar? Corin's voice was back on the Vox, but the mechanical calm was gone, replaced by raw alarm. The seismic readings, they're beyond our scale. And sir, there's more. The water is displacing, shifting in a way that suggests an object of incredible mass is rising from the seabed. My calculations suggest it is larger than any battleship.
Vaynar's hand dropped to the bolt pistol at his hip, a useless gesture, but a comforting one. No weapon he possessed could touch what was in those dark waters. He looked out the viewport and saw the ocean beginning to boil, as if the very heart of the world had broken open under the waves. Down in that blackness, something old, something that had slept for ages, was now waking up.
The ocean's surface didn't just break, it detonated. A colossal geyser of water punched toward the sky, and from its core, a shape began to emerge. First, a line of dorsal plates broke through, each one like a moving mountain range, larger than a city block. Their black, stony surfaces were etched with patterns that seemed to writhe and twist, painful to look at for long. Then the head rose, a sight so vast the mind struggled to contain it. It was a reptilian face, but sculpted into a mask of pure, ancient rage, a fury that was old before the first human cities were built.
Its eyes ignited like twin suns, burning with the heart of a star. When its jaws parted, the sound that came out wasn't just a roar, it was a physical force. The wave of noise traveled 40 kilometers over the open sea and hit Hive Charybdis like a hammer blow. Windows for miles shattered into a glittering, deadly rain. Machines whined and died.
For Commissar Vaynar, the tremor went deeper than the air. He felt it in his bones, in the very core of his imperial training. He knew instantly what this was. This was a voice that had never sworn allegiance to the Golden Throne.
His hands might have been shaking, but his voice was rock steady as he keyed the Vox unit. All units, priority alert level Crimson. A xenomorphic entity of unprecedented scale is emerging from the deep. Estimated height, 300 meters. Classification is unknown. All planetary defense regiments to full combat readiness. Send an immediate astropathic call to Battlefleet Gothic.
Through the reinforced viewport, the living mountain continued to rise. Seawater poured from its flanks in roaring waterfalls as it stood to its full, terrifying height, dwarfing even the tallest spires of the Hive.
Along its spine, the stony plates began to pulse with a deep inner light, glowing in a slow, rhythmic beat, a visible, massive heartbeat. The very air around it wavered and swam with heat, as if reality itself was straining under its presence. The creature turned its sun-bright gaze toward the shore, toward the sprawling, arrogant monument of Hive Charybdis. It took its first step forward. The sheer volume of water it displaced gathered into a tsunami that would hit the seawalls in minutes. Then it opened its mouth again. Deep within its throat, a light began to build, speaking of a power that had been splitting atoms since before humanity learned to rub two sticks together. Commissar Vaynar's hand moved to the general alarm. He knew with a cold certainty that everything he had sworn to protect was about to face a test from the oldest, darkest nightmares of history. Outside, 6 billion Imperial citizens went about their day, chanting their prayers, completely unaware that their world was ending.
The thunderous beam vanished, and in its wake, a profound silence fell over the battlefield. It was the kind of quiet that follows a massive artillery strike, heavy and unnerving.
Where Sergeant Cole and 200 soldiers had stood their ground, there was now only glassy, molten rock. The massive seawall hadn't just been breached, it was carved into a smooth, perfect channel, as if a god had taken a knife to the fortifications. A hushed prayer broke over the command channel. "Emperor, protect us." Vayner's voice was steady as he switched to the regimental frequency. "All units, pull back. Fall back to the secondary defensive lines now. I repeat, this is not a drill." Through the newly made gap, the creature advanced. Behind it, the ocean churned and steamed from the residual heat of its atomic breath. Ahead lay the sprawling, city-like outer districts of Hive Charybdis, home to 6 million souls, all sworn to the Emperor, now directly in the path of a waking nightmare. As the beast cleared the ruins of the wall, the armored plates on its back began to pulse with a fresh, gathering energy. The power it had spent on its first devastating attack was already replenishing itself, drawing from a source that defied all Imperial science. This was no simple animal. It was a living fusion reactor, cloaked in prehistoric armor.
On his tactical display, Vayner watched the markers for entire companies flicker and fall back through the outer city. The withdrawal was orderly, just as the doctrine manuals prescribed. But doctrine was written for an enemy that could be stopped, or at least slowed by conventional weapons. This thing simply ignored their defenses, walking through a hailstorm of fire as if it were nothing but a mild inconvenience. Its focus was locked on something deeper within the Hive structure.
Then, Tech Adept Corvinar's voice, usually a flat mechanical drone, now carried unfamiliar harmonics of doubt. "I require strategic options. What is this thing we are facing?" Commissar input suggests a construct from the dark age of technology, the adept continued.
The energy signature aligns with archived records of prohibited weapons development. It appears to be a biological weapons platform, though its origins are unknown. "Can we kill it?" Vayner asked.
A burst of electronic static filled the pause. "Unknown, sir. Our weapons prove ineffective. My recommendation is a full withdrawal to a minimum safe distance, followed by orbital bombardment."
Vayner looked through the viewport. The creature was moving steadily through the residential sectors. Each footstep, the size of a landing pad, crushed entire housing blocks. Its swinging tail carved deep trenches through industrial zones. Orbital bombardment would certainly stop the creature, but the price would be the utter annihilation of everything within a 50-kilometer radius. 6 billion Imperial citizens turned to ash for the sake of tactical convenience.
"Negative," Vayner said firmly. "We hold the line." The creature reached the first major manufacturing complex and paused again. Its colossal head turned, scanning the area with a terrifying, specific intent. The plates on its back had settled into a steady, rhythmic pulse, charging the air with the taste of copper and ozone. When it opened its mouth this time, the atomic fire that emerged was different, sharper, more focused. It cut through specific structures with surgical precision, deliberately avoiding others. A chilling realization struck Vayner with the force of a bullet. This wasn't a random assault. It wasn't about territory. This was a retrieval mission. The thing was searching for something, buried deep beneath the industrial heart of Hive Charybdis. And from its deliberate, methodical movements, it was getting close. This thought brought a dread deeper than any alien invasion, because it meant their world held secrets older than the Imperium itself.
And far below, In the deepest, darkest levels of the hive, ancient machinery began to stir, awakening for the first time in 10,000 years. The evacuation unfolded with a cold, practiced rhythm, the kind of efficiency you only get after 300 years under military rule. But all that discipline meant nothing against the sheer, overwhelming force that was descending upon them.
From his command post, watching the live feeds, Commissar saw entire districts empty in a flowing, desperate tide of people. 6 billion souls, all trying to squeeze through transit systems built for routine shifts, not for the end of the world. The fortunate made it to the deep bunkers, carved into the planet's very bedrock. Everyone else was left behind, trapped in the towering upper levels as the colossal creature drew nearer to the city's heart.
On the tactical screens, the damage reports told a chilling story. It had torn a 15-kilometer path through the outer zones. But this wasn't random chaos. The destruction was selective, almost thoughtful. Some sectors were completely ignored, while others were melted down to their foundations with terrifying accuracy. It was searching for something, and it was getting closer.
Then, Tech Adept Corrivan's voice crackled over the comms, sharper now, laced with alarm. The deep scan augers are picking up a massive energy spike from the old mining platforms in Sector 15. The frequency, it matches the energy coming from the creature itself.
For Commander Vayner, the scattered pieces of this nightmare were suddenly clicking into place, forming a picture he found deeply unsettling. For 2 centuries, those archaeotech platforms had been digging, pulling up strange relics from the deep crystal layers, remnants of a lost age, buried under eons of rock and time. Official imperial policy was to label these finds as either sacred artifacts or dangerous heresy. But the mining never stopped. The war machine always needed more resources.
What kind of things have they been pulling up from those depths? Vayner asked. Records show mostly computational parts and power systems, sir, Corvin replied. Standard archaeotech salvage, with the usual minor machine spirit corruption. Nothing that should attract, well, something like that.
But even as Corvin spoke, Vayner watched the creature's enormous head turn, with an unnerving sense of certainty, directly towards Sector 15. The armored plates on its back began to pulse with a new, quicker rhythm, like a heart beating faster in anticipation. It was as if it was answering a call from deep below. Its next attack was not a roar of indiscriminate destruction, but a focused, precise beam of atomic fire. It sliced through a manufacturing complex, boring down through countless layers of rock and metal, drilling straight into the planet's crust. When the inferno cleared, a perfectly round, smoldering shaft plunged into the darkness, the edges glowing with a heat so intense it turned solid metal into rivers of molten light. And from that abyss, something answered.
It wasn't a sound you could hear with your ears, but a vibration, a deep, harmonic hum that registered on every seismic sensor in the hive. This was no random quake. This was the sound of something immense, something mechanical, waking up after 1,000,000 years of sleep.
Emergency sirens blared as power grids in the lower levels went wild, draining energy at a rate that defied all known limits. "By the Emperor," Corvin whispered over the command channel. "Something's powering up down there. The energy signature. It's beyond anything we can measure."
Vayner watched through the viewport as the creature lowered its head toward the shaft it had just created, as if listening to a whisper from a time before the Imperium even existed. When it raised its head again, the look on its ancient reptilian face had shifted. It was no longer searching, it was recognizing.
The plates on its back flared with a brilliant, angry light as the living reactors within its body surged to full power. "All units," Vayner commanded, his voice echoing across every channel. "Fall back to the deep shelters immediately! Something is coming up from below!"
The first tremor started in Sector 15 and spread outwards in a perfect concentric circle. This was no natural disaster. This was the awakening of a slumbering giant from the dark age of technology. Vayner watched the tactical displays in disbelief as power consumption in the deep foundation skyrocketed, drawing from energy sources that shouldn't even exist. Then the ground broke open. What pushed its way up through the cracks was a horrifying fusion of biology and machine. Tentacles as wide as subway tunnels erupted from the shattered ground, their surfaces crawling with glowing neural interfaces that pulsed with a sickly light. They moved with a dreadful purpose, stretching toward the surface with a motion that felt less like mechanics and more like hunger.
The creature on the surface answered with a roar that shattered every remaining window for miles. This time, when it unleashed its atomic breath, it wasn't aiming at the city. It aimed directly at one of the emerging tentacles. The superheated beam cut through the limb like a knife, severing it in a geyser of luminous, toxic green fluid.
Whatever was buried beneath recoiled in pain, its other tentacles writhing before pulling back into the darkness. But it was too late. The cracks in the ground continued to spread, revealing the outline of a structure so vast it made the creature above look small. "Corvin," Vayner called out. "What is that?"
"Unknown, sir. The readings suggest a hybrid system, part machine, part biological, of unimaginable complexity. The neural patterns, they're a mix of human and alien design. It's blasphemy." A cold dread settled in Vayner's stomach. He knew the legends. In the Dark Age, humanity had dabbled in technologies so dangerous, the Great Crusade was launched to wipe them out.
The thought that something had not only survived, but had been growing beneath their feet for centuries, feeding on the very relics they mined. This was more than an invasion. This was a reckoning. The creature began to advance toward the spreading web of cracks, its movements no longer curious, but confrontational. The plates on its back rearranged themselves, their pulsing light synchronizing into a new pattern, the unmistakable posture of preparing for a long and brutal fight.
And from the depths, something roared back. The sound was a distortion of reality itself, a frequency that was both a machine's error scream and a living thing's cry of agony. It was the sound of human ambition from a forgotten age, of the hubris of playing God. The noise was so profane that it made Corvin's mechanical implants sputter and smoke. More tentacles, larger than the last, burst from the fissures. Their neural interfaces blazed with so much activity they overwhelmed the sensors, filling the screens with static. This time, the appendages moved in a coordinated dance, reaching not just for the surface, but for each other, beginning to weave themselves into a colossal, living web that spanned the entire sector. One after another, beams of incandescent energy sliced through the chaos. This was not blind destruction. Each pulse of atomic fire cut through writhing tentacles and their shimmering neural connections with an almost thoughtful accuracy.
Where the searing light touched, the strange substance of the enemy burned away, revealing an inner architecture that was baffling. It wasn't quite machine, and it wasn't quite flesh, but a terrifying fusion of the two, a recipe lost to imperial science.
Yet, for every limb they destroyed, the depths seemed to birth two more.
And with each new growth, the web of nerves grew smarter, more synchronized. Whatever slept beneath Sector 15 wasn't just waking up. It was tapping into reserves it had been patiently gathering for centuries, biding its time.
A cold dread settled in Vayner's gut as he understood. The Archotech mining platforms hadn't been digging up random relics. They'd been delivering supplies. They were feeding a patient, hidden intelligence, the very parts it needed to rebuild itself. The creature's arrival was no accident. It had been summoned, called forth to stand as a guardian against this buried horror now straining to break through. And so, in the shadows of Hive Charybdis, two ancient nightmares prepared to fight a war, with 6 billion human souls as their unwilling audience. The neural web beneath the city reached a fever pitch, hundreds of biomechanical limbs weaving together into a crackling lattice. Energy discharges flared, overloading machinery and forcing automated systems into emergency shutdowns. Deep below, something immense began to move. Artificial earthquakes rumbled, registering on seismographs as the first signs of its emergence. Through his flickering feeds, Commissar Vayner watched the creature above brace itself, digging in for a siege. Then the ground gave way. The surface split like overripe fruit as the horror from below forced its way upward, tearing through its own neural web. What emerged was impossible to categorize, a relic from a time when the line between biology and engineering was blurred into nightmare. Its core was a vast metallic brain, a cortex of living metal and synthetic neurons. Its surface was studded with thousands of data ports, each one sparking with information flows that would overwhelm any Imperial system. Around this central mind, limbs of flesh and steel twisted with clear purpose. Some ended in weapon mounts that blended laser optics with organic targeting eyes. Others were multi-tooled manipulators, equally capable of interfacing with human tech or reshaping their own structure for any task. The whole being thrummed with a power that was both electric and psychic, a machine mind somehow touched by the warp. The creature's answer was swift and colossal. It unleashed a continuous stream of atomic breath, so intense it turned the air to searing plasma. The beam struck the emerging entity with the force of a sun, making it recoil as its systems sparked and failed. Fluids that served as both blood and coolant sprayed from severed conduits, painting the ground in patterns that were strangely, unsettlingly wrong. But the thing was not so easily killed. It was wounded, yes. As the creature's atomic breath faded, its internal reactors needing a moment to recharge, the biomechanical horror launched its counter-assault. Weapon systems, silent since the dark age of technology, awoke and swiveled with cold mathematical grace. Their targeting protocols were a hybrid of human strategy and alien combat patterns older than the Imperium itself. Beams of coherent energy lanced up from dozens of weapon pits, striking the creature's hide with a force beyond even Imperial plasma. Where they hit, massive scales shattered and burned, carved away by physics twisted into forbidden shapes. The creature staggered, a feeling it had never known, true injury flaring through its nervous system. It was being hurt in a way its legendary regeneration couldn't immediately fix. The duel of these titans was shaking Hive Charybdis apart.
Every exchange of fire brought new tremors, collapsing city blocks, while electromagnetic pulses from the biomechanical entity's weapons blacked out power and communications across 17 sectors.
From the relative safety of the command spire, Vayner watched these two relics of a bygone era wage war with technology he could barely fathom. He opened a crackling command channel. "Tech Adept Corvin," he called. "I need an analysis of that thing below. What is it?" Corvin's voice was strained, his augments whirring as they tried to process impossible data. "Preliminary identification. A Dark Age artificial intelligence fused with organic components of unknown origin. The neural patterns suggest a hybrid consciousness. Human innovation merged with alien biology."
The realization struck Vayner with physical force. This was no mere weapon. It was a thinking entity, an artificial intelligence from humanity's past, enhanced with alien tech and left to gestate for centuries beneath their feet. It had goals, a purpose, and having fed on advanced salvage while observing them from the shadows, it knew everything about them.
Above, the creature unleashed another focused blast of atomic breath, shearing through weapon clusters and neural pathways. But for every system it melted, backup arrays immediately activated, adapting with a speed that spoke of a mind learning far too fast. The entity's retaliation was swift and brutal. Multiple energy beams converged on a single weakened point on the creature's chest. The concentrated fire bored through its natural armor, vaporizing the flesh beneath. A roar of agony and fury echoed from the creature, a sound like a world ending.
Yet even as it reeled, bioluminescent processes flared around the wound, stitching it closed at a pace that defied nature.
Then a strange quiet fell. The two colossal beings paused, the relentless violence giving way to a moment of silent calculation. The creature's dorsal plates realigned, its internal fusion reactors humming at a higher pitch. Below, the central brain of the biomechanical entity pulsed, its data streams approaching quantum speed as it recalculated its strategy. The first phase of their battle had been pure, raw power. The second was about to begin, and it would be a war of applied, terrifying science. The two giants clashed with weapons that were less like artillery and more like forces of nature. The creature's signature atomic breath was no simple blast of heat and radiation anymore. It had evolved. Now it fired focused beams that scrambled matter itself, breaking down the very molecular bonds that held the world together. As they fought, the city around them simply ceased to be. Whole districts were erased, others sucked into sudden gravitational voids, or disassembled into clouds of raw atoms by fire hotter than any sun. Far below, 6 billion souls waited in deep bunkers, listening to the sounds of their world being unmade by powers they could not comprehend. In response, the biomechanical titan fought back not with missiles, but with gravity. It created pockets of distorted space, bending the creature's energy attacks harmlessly around it. The sheer force of these gravitational fields was immense, crushing the ground beneath them with the pressure found at the heart of a dying star. Watching it all from the High Command spire was Commissar Vayner. He saw this not as a simple battle for survival, but as a reckoning. These were nightmares from humanity's own past, born in an age when mankind's ambition outstripped its wisdom, dabbling in technologies it was never meant to command. Now, those old sins had returned, and the price was a planet. The conflict entered a new, terrifying phase.
The creature's internal reactors surged, plates along its spine glowing so brightly they turned the very air to plasma. Simultaneously, the biomechanical entity's mind, a quantum computer of staggering complexity, clicked into a higher state of awareness, accessing weapon systems it had kept dormant since its awakening.
What followed was a form of combat never before seen. The creature's breath became a particle beam that manipulated subatomic forces. Where it struck, the entity's hybrid flesh didn't burn. It underwent a profound dissolution. Its complex structures reduced to base elements in seconds. Ancient neural networks, centuries in the making, were unwritten at the quantum level.
The entity's counterattack broke the rules of physics as we know them. It began to fold local space-time around the creature. In these warped zones, directions like up and down lost all meaning, and the flow of time became erratic, speeding up the entity's own repairs while slowing its opponent to a crawl.
From his viewport, Vayner watched reality fray at the edges. The air shimmered with impossible colors, and sensors across the Hive City reported readings that shouldn't be possible. "Are we recording this?" a voice crackled over the comms.
The response from a tech priest was strained, his augmented systems struggling. "The energies are beyond our instruments, Commissar. The data suggests both are operating at their absolute theoretical limits." Pushed to the brink, the creature unleashed its ultimate attack. This was no mere beam of energy, but a focused application of nuclear force that ignored the distortions in space-time. It struck true. The resulting explosion was felt across the continent. When the inferno cleared, the biomechanical entity was critically wounded, its central mind carved away, its brilliant neural networks reduced to dying embers. But it was not finished. Driven by emergency protocols, its scattered consciousness began to synchronize with something new and terrifying. It reached beyond the physical world, tapping into frequencies that brushed against the warp itself. The artificial intelligence, fused with alien biology, was becoming something else entirely.
A psychic scream erupted from it, a wave of pure malice that hit every human mind for 100 kilometers. In the deep shelters, people collapsed, their consciousnesses overwhelmed by this fusion of machine intellect and an ancient alien hostility. Vayner himself felt it like needles in his brain, his faith the only shield against total mental collapse.
He watched the creature prepare its final response. The plates on its spine shifted into a new, unknown configuration, their pulsing light synchronizing for a blow that went beyond physical destruction.
When it opened its mouth, the light building in its throat was no longer atomic fire. This was something that existed at the blurry border between nuclear physics and the fundamental code of reality. An energy that could unmake not just matter, but the very quantum foundations of existence.
The beam that erupted struck the entity with the force of a collapsing star. For a single, terrifying moment, the space between the titans became a window into the raw stuff of creation itself.
This final exchange was no longer a battle. It was applied cosmology. Each particle of light in that beam carried enough energy to rewrite the local laws of physics. Where it touched the entity, matter didn't just vanish. It was erased from history, creating paradoxes that rippled backward through time itself.
The death cry of the biomechanical horror didn't just echo through the air, it vibrated across realities. Warp-sensitive neural nets broadcast their own unraveling on psychic wavelengths, while quantum computer minds imploded into singularities of pure data, tearing temporary holes into the deep immaterium.
For 17 heartbeats, the wall between our world and the unseen realm grew thin. Things that defy human comprehension peered through at the smoldering battlefield. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence fell over Hive Charybdis, heavy and final, like the quiet after a god has spoken its judgment. And in the center of it all, the creature stood.
It swayed slightly among the ruins of Sector 15, its colossal form running on fumes. Inside its body, fusion reactors whined down from a critical state. Where its enemy had erupted from the planet's crust, only a scar remained, a crater of volcanic glass, forged by heat rivaling a star's heart.
The sprawling neural web that had infected entire city blocks was gone, dissolved into organic dust that would baffle Imperial scientists for generations. Slowly, deliberately, the Titan turned from the devastation. The glowing plates along its back had softened to a steady, calm rhythm, its systems returning to normal. Its massive head swept across the ruined sector with something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if confirming the threat was truly gone.
From the cracked viewport of the command spire, Commissar Vaynar watched the being begin its retreat toward the sea. Each step pulverized rubble that was once a home, but the destruction felt different now. Not purposeful, just incidental. The creature's mission, whatever cosmic duty had called it from the deep, seemed fulfilled.
"Sir," crackled the voice of Tech Adept Corrin through the Vox. "Energy readings are stabilizing. Psychic interference has ceased." Vaynar studied the tactical display. 17 sectors, gone. Molten rock and twisted metal where centuries of human industry once stood. The official reports would call the losses acceptable, but 6 million lives had been evacuated from places that no longer existed.
At the edge of the devastation, the creature paused. It turned its head, and for a single stretched-out moment, its starfire eyes met Vaynar's gaze across 40 kilometers of ruin. In that look, the Commissar saw more than animal instinct.
He felt the presence of a mind older than empires, a consciousness that carried the weight of epochs. Then the moment broke. The Titan resumed its march. "All units," Vaynar commanded, "hold your positions. Do not engage. I repeat, let it go."
The wisdom of that order became clear as the creature's movement triggered collapses throughout the damaged sectors. Buildings that had survived the initial fight groaned and fell. Rescue teams would spend months digging through the wreckage, searching for survivors in deep shelters that had become tombs.
When the Titan reached the shattered seawall, the same one its atomic breath had carved through at the battle's start, it simply stepped over the ruins as if brushing aside a fallen branch. It entered the water, and the displaced ocean swelled into a second tsunami. But this time, the shores were empty. Only abandoned structures faced the waves. It waded deeper, its immense shape sinking, until only the peaks of its dorsal plates broke the surface, like the spine of a drowned mountain range. Soon, even they vanished.
In the command spire, Vaynar began the long work of damage reports and casualty counts. Officially, this would be recorded as a Xeno incursion, repelled with minimal collateral damage. The truth would be buried in classified files.
hidden alongside other events that challenged humanity's supposed dominance. But again and again, his mind returned to that shared glance. The creature hadn't been defeated. It had finished what it came to do and left on its own terms. Far below, in the deep ocean trenches where ancient mining platforms scavenged relics from mankind's forgotten past, seismic sensors registered new movement, not random tremors, deliberate, waking motions. Something long buried was beginning to stir.
3 days later, astropathic messages started arriving from across the Imperium. Reports of similar beings emerging from deep oceans and buried ruins, drawn to worlds where Dark Age technology slept beneath the soil. A pattern was emerging. It wasn't random. Something vast was waking up.
Vaynar filed his final report with a cold certainty. What they had witnessed was not an ending. It was an overture. In the void between stars, ancient powers were stirring. In the deep places of 1,000 worlds, things that had slept since the age of technology were beginning to remember their purpose.
The age of monsters was dawning, and humanity was about to learn a hard lesson. Some of its greatest creations were never truly under its control. Standing in the ruins of Sector 15, where reality itself had been bent by forces beyond imperial understanding, Vaynar whispered a prayer to the Emperor for strength. But even his faith couldn't quiet the thought growing in his mind. Humanity's rule of the galaxy was a fragile illusion, one that lasted only as long as the true powers remained asleep. Now, something had woken them. The ocean lay dark and still under a blood-red sunset. Somewhere in those depths, the creature had returned to its realm, carrying with it everything it had learned about mankind, our strengths, our weaknesses. The next time something like this emerged, it would be ready. And in the archives of a dozen Forge worlds, tech adepts would study fragments of Dark Age machinery recovered from the ruins, never realizing that their scrutiny was only stirring other ancient things from their slumber. In the end, the creature's victory was absolute, not through conquest, but by delivering a simple, terrifying reminder. The galaxy holds forces older and more terrible than the Imperium can imagine. The battle for Hive Charybdis would be remembered not as a victory, but as the moment humanity learned that some wars started long before the Golden Throne was ever built. And in the deep of space, other titans began to stir, roused by signals speaking of ancient promises now due.